kids from the school here. We just love having you here, and thank you for the energy and the worship you've given us this morning. Just wondering if someone who knows what they're doing here with the stands can make me a pulpit quickly, just to rest my notes upon. I am going to need my notes a little bit this morning, and so if someone can organise that, that would be absolutely awesome. The sermon is on the widow with the two mites, as you've guessed in the children's story. I'm going to take that as our scripture reading. It's actually Mark chapter 12 if you want to follow on. But I'm going to take that as our scripture reading for this morning and as reading it through. And I'll make notes from there as we go through. C.S. Lewis, who's a favourite author of mine, he's the guy that wrote some of those great books that some of us younger ones know as movies, and The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and those type of stories. We love that. Well, he's made this quote. He said, the glory of God, and as our only means to glorifying him, the salvation of human souls is the real business of life. I'm okay with this, but I might be a bit cluttered, I reckon. Yeah, but thanks for the thought. And so he said that is the business of God's people, and that is the business of God's church. As we saw in the DVD clip, it's very easy to clutter that up. Now, if you're a bit sleepy this morning or want to go to sleep, this is my sermon in one sentence. Here's the big idea. When our hearts are in the right place, everything else will fall into place. When our hearts are in the right place, everything else will fall into place. That's the main gist of it, of my sermon. Now, let's put a bit of body to that. We often look at this story and think, oh, it's all about the widow who gave her all to Jesus, and Jesus sees the various sizes of the offerings, and Jesus commends the widow for it. And so sometimes we as pastors tend to grab that text and say, very good text for stewardship. Let's smack the church in the head with a sermon on stewardship. But I think there is more to see in this story, because there is no thing here. I don't think Jesus is saying that all widows should give everything away, if you take that story literally. And so we have to look at the story in its context. Now, the story, as we know, is found in Mark 12, verses 42 to 44. Let's back up a couple of verses. Let's look at verse 38. Look at verse 38 and see what the context is, or the surroundings of this story, and why Jesus commended the woman. Verse 38. He also said in his teaching, beware of the scribes who want to go around with long robes and who want greeting in the marketplaces, the best seats in the synagogues, and the places of honour at the banquets. They devour widows' houses and say long prayers, and just for show, they'll receive harsher judgment. So Jesus has just said, watch out for these guys who come in with the big robes and all the pomp and ceremony and make it all about me, 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 and look as if they're showing a front up front to you in my house. And when behind the scenes, they're devouring widows. They're destroying people's lives. Rich and powerful leaders that he was describing here are people that want to be idolized, and they will take advantage of people to receive it. They are destroying the widow. They are destroying the widow. To drive the point home, Jesus is showing here the widow walking in, and he says, look at her. She's full of guilt, full of shame and oppression. that the leaders have placed on her. And if you want to see it in its context even again, I'm going to need a glass of water if someone can grab me one. Back to Mark 12. And the beginning there, you see Jesus tells a parable. And he's talking here about the vine dressers. And they were killing people who came with a message to them. And they even killed the vineyard owner's son when he sent the vineyard owner to them. And so he's saying it's not just what you see physically, but these scribes and Pharisees are also destroying people's lives spiritually. Destroying people's lives spiritually. Now we look at this story. Thanks, Ethel. And there are a few lessons that we can look at here. One, this story teaches us is the attitude of your heart. What is the attitude of your heart? The Pharisees focused on following the letter of the law, but their hearts were in the wrong place because they missed God's heart. Their hearts were in the wrong place because they missed God's heart. And they followed the law to the very letter. And yes, they kept it, but they missed out on God's heart completely. They expected everyone to interpret the law the way that they interpreted it and act it out the same way they did. And they placed that burden on all those who attended the church. And this is what they were doing that day when the woman came in and gave her 2 mites. They were placing their judgments, their laws, on that woman. And what they did would have been what they were doing. So what they put in would have been exactly what the law required and no more. So they weren't giving of their lives and the sacrifice in any way. They are just keeping it to what the law required them to do. No more, no less. They were very, very comfortable. Whereas this woman had put in the 2 mites, she was very, very uncomfortable. She had no more to give. No more to give. She couldn't go any further. But there's a problem with these Pharisees, and that's what Jesus is pointing out. You see, they cared more for following the law than they did treating people with love and respect. They cared more about following the law than they did treating people with love and respect. I asked you and I this morning, as we claim to be God's people, God's children, God's church, God's family, who is our widow? Who is our widow? Is there someone in our lives? Is there someone in our community surrounding us that's being marginalised because we've put up boxes and rules and laws that keep them from us and us from them? We put up boxes, rules, barriers that keep them from us and us from them. They understood what the law required, but they didn't realise that God gave the law out of his love for humanity. And so, nothing wrong with the law. They added a whole bunch more to it. And they had fouled it up. They didn't get the fact that the Israelites were called of God and challenged by God to be his light to the countries and the cities around them. In other words, They've put the light out and they're refusing to shine the love of Jesus. And when other cities, other countries were looking to Israel, all they were seeing was laws and regulations and not people full of love, full of respect, and full of care for those who are marginalised in their community. Again, I ask, who is our widow? Who is the one that we need to go up and move the fence away from them, around us, so we're all inside the fence. Second lesson, let's look at the woman. And she shows us a faith that gives. For her, after those 2 coins were dropping into the box, that was it. There was no more. She had no credit card, no stocks, no bonds, no way of even extracting any extra credit in any way in order to live. Probably her next meal was on the line now because she had given her all. She gave not because she could, but because she wanted to. She gave not because she could, but because she wanted to. She gave a sacrifice similar to Jesus. On the cross, Jesus gave in the same manner. Jesus also gave his all and held nothing back. And because he is more concerned with the state of our hearts than what we give. He saw our sinful hearts. He saw the place where we were, and he said, I'm dying for Lauren. I'm dying for Swan Valley Church. I'm dying for Carmel Church. I'm giving my all because I see the heart, not what they can give me. God is more concerned with the state of our heart than what we give. And so, in John 3:16, it says, For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him will not perish, but have everlasting life. Jesus gave his all. In other passages, it says he was poured out for you and I. And then too, in Timothy and Paul in Philippians says that we must be poured out in turn, just like Jesus was. I'm wondering, when Jesus comes and as a beautiful song we sang says, I have decided, and he says, hey, church member, what have you decided this morning? Can we say, I have decided to follow Jesus? In this picture of this, where we've walked into the temple and watching with Jesus this morning, who do you most side with? The Pharisees with their flashy coats and their flashy ways of putting their money into the offering box, only out of their excess? In other words, just doing what you have to for Jesus and no more? Or do you find yourself with the woman with the 2 mites and you're saying, Jesus, I know that you died for me. I want to give you my all in return. And you know what Jesus asks? He asks for your all. And so this morning, if you're sitting there thinking, hey, I need to live my life to Jesus afresh, why don't you do with the song that Carmel has sung us and say, yep, no turning back. I'm following Jesus. Well, how do we follow Jesus? If this woman was honouring God by what she did, if the other guys weren't honouring God, how do I honour God? How do I give my heart to Jesus? 6 things. We honour God when we're good stewards with our wealth. That's what the story is indicating. But there's much more of the story, as you can see. Secondly, we honour God by our actions. We honour God with the sacrifice of our lives. We honour God through praise and worship. We honour God, fifthly, through our obedience. Yes, obedience is still a word that needs to happen in our lives. We honour God by putting him first in all our decision making. Now, when you think of it, you have Jesus, you have the world, as we sung in that song, but what can become between us and Jesus and keep us to the world is those 6 things. It's our wealth, our actions, our lives, our praise and worship, our obedience, our decision making. That's where the rubber meets the road. That's where it's all really at. That's where the battlefield is fought, is in those 6 things. And Jesus is saying here, honour me by giving all those 6 main areas of your life to me. In fact, in Romans 12 verse 1, I'm wondering if I can test the team at the back. In the Message translation, Romans 12 and verse 1 in the Message translation, or if a young person can find their phone for me, I had it this morning. It says it really, really beautifully of how Jesus wants us to be. Romans 12 verses 1 and 2. Romans 12 verses 1 and 2 in the Message. You got it? How about reading out a big loud voice? Are you brave enough to do that or not? Okay, read verses 1 and 2. And here we go. We're getting it now. I'll do it. I want to give the voice a rest. That's not in the Message.
Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifice. Oh no, that's NIV. Sorry, my translation changed.
It's here now. It sums up with take your lives, your ordinary everyday life.
So here is what I want you to do.
Yeah, go for it. Yell it out.
So here is what I want you to do. God helping you. Take your everyday, ordinary life. You're sleeping, eating, going to work, and walking around life. And place it before God as an offering. Embracing what God does for you is the best thing you can do for him. Don't become so well adjusted to your culture that you fit into it without even thinking. Instead, fix your attention on God. You will be changed from the inside out. Readily recognize what he wants for you and quickly respond to it. Unlike the culture around you, always dragging you down to its level of immaturity, God brings the best out of you, develops well-formed maturity in you.
Thank you so much. God doesn't want the big, flashy, glorified robes and the beautiful big ways of pouring your money into the offering box as those Pharisees did. He wants you to take the 2 mites of your life, your ordinary, everyday life, so this passage says, and offer it as an offering to him. And he says he wants to bring change in you and I from the inside out. My challenge to you this morning is give God your ordinary everyday life and let him change you from the inside out. Now, if you've missed the point this morning, if you've missed my main idea, maybe you'll get it in this. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity of going home to my hometown, Mildura. Mildura is really the centrepiece of Australia. You may think that Perth is, but no, it's Mildura. We've got the Murray River, We've got more sunlight than any other city in the world. And we've got the grapes, the oranges and the avocados. It's a great city for a young person to grow up, and that's where the Pratt family grew up. And those of you who know, I'm sure some of you Carmel guys know some of my brothers, and they've been around a bit. Anyhow, I finally got to fly home, and I haven't flown home for many, many, many years. And the old airport, it used to be a tin shed. And you would park on the dirt around it, and you could see through the fence area, and you could see the planes taking off. And you could it was, in fact, if you were going to fly to Melbourne or fly to Adelaide or fly to Perth, you would walk into this tin shed. There you would arrange the tickets and that, etc. Most of it was manual. It was manually, and you could walk out to the plane. And you could also, if you were going to see your friends off, you could walk out to the plane too and watch them going onto the plane. And then up would come this rope, and it was mean you, if you weren't going, you stay behind. They walk onto the plane would turn around and take off down the runway. Well, that was 32 years ago. Since I've flown on that plane, and the time I came back 2 years ago recently, been some massive upgrades. The airstrip has been trebled in size. It could now take big passenger planes. There's now 2 sheds, and not tin, they're brick, and air-conditioned buildings. One's for Virgin, one's for Qantas, and you've got to stay inside now before you go out. And also there's this other strange thing that's there, which we never had when I was 30, 40 years ago. This thing called, you've got to put your stuff all on the conveyor belt and have it all x-rayed. Well, I lost my aftershave and I lost my shaving cream there. I've never lost it there in my life. There never was one there. And then I go to walk out. Sorry, sir, you can't walk through here. The alarms will go off. Until you wait in your seat until you're called. And so I sit back and sit in the seat, and me being a guy who's got to be on the go all the time, pull out a book and start reading a book. Finally, we're called to go and board the plane, and so we go out and climb the stairs, and we're greeted by the staff, and you sit down, and you notice another thing is there's this curtain between on this plane between the pilot and the passengers. It's almost like there's the holy place and the most holy place, and you go up and you try and pull the curtain to go and say hello to the captain, and you can't do it. The staff, you say, no, sir, just take your seat, please, and all be fine. And you shake your head and that, and you think to yourself, well, we're not there yet. All of a sudden, the captain comes on and gives a report of the weather, etc. And then the hostess shows you how to sit in your seat and how to use the life raft you have to, how to use the oxygen you have to, the rigmarole. It's all changed so much there now with these bigger planes. And you sit there. When you arrive at this brand new terminal, have you arrived at your destination? No. When you walk out onto the plane to take the stairs up to the plane, have you arrived at your destination? No. When you look in and see this curtain and just pull it aside and see into the Holy of Holies and you see the pilot there, have you arrived at the destination? Even though you've seen the pilot? No. You don't arrive at your destination until that motor roars into life, takes you up the runway into the air, and the pilot guides the systems with the help of the control towers at the various airports that he needs to tap into. And with that, you land in Melbourne, happy, safely, and go and do what you had planned to go and do. Church, it's like that with us and our salvation. All too often we place a lot of our trust in the trappings that are around. And that's what Jesus is saying to these Pharisees. You place your trust in the trappings, in the doings, in the behaviour, and you don't place your trust in the motor, Jesus Christ himself. I think that in our church, I think that in our lives, it's time that we switch the motor on and stopped playing with the trappings. The woman that with the 2 mites, she switched the motor on. She gave her all. Jesus, when he died on Calvary, he switched the motor on. He gave his all. My challenge to you and I this morning is, how's it with you and I? Are you looking at the trappings of the aeroplane? Or have you given your heart to Jesus afresh and said, Jesus, I've decided to follow you. Take my life and let it be all that you want it to be. Thank you once again, church, for walking in the footsteps of Jesus with me in our series.